Hi, I'm Rachel Chen, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones who understand you the least. For 15 years, I built a technology empire from my garage, but apparently that wasn't enough for my perfect family. You see, in the Chen family, education was everything. My older brother Michael was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect SAT scores, and a full ride to Harvard Business School. I was different. Numbers spoke to me differently. While Michael memorized textbooks, I was taking computers apart, learning to code, and dreaming of building something revolutionary. Rachel, you're wasting your potential, Mom would say, shaking her head as I worked on computers in our garage instead of applying to colleges. Look at your brother, already preparing for his MBA, and you're just tinkering. The tinkering they dismissed, it became Chen Tech Solutions, now valued at $100 million. But let me start from the beginning. 15 years ago, while Michael was starting his first year at Harvard, I dropped out of community college. The day I told my parents, "You'd think I committed a crime." Dad, a respected professor at Stanford, couldn't even look at me. Mom cried for weeks. Michael, home for spring break, just smirked. "Well, sis, I guess someone has to be the family disappointment," he said, straightening his Harvard sweater. "Don't worry, when I'm running a Fortune 500 company, I'll give you a job in the mailroom." That night, in my tiny garage workspace, surrounded by circuit boards and half-finished prototypes, I made a promise to myself. I would succeed, not by following their path, but by creating my own. The first few years were brutal. While Michael posted photos from glamorous MBA networking events, I was sleeping on a futon in my one-room office, living on ramen noodles and coffee. But I had something they couldn't see, a vision. I'd identified a massive gap in the cybersecurity market. While big companies were focusing on complex, expensive solutions, small businesses were left vulnerable. I developed Security Shield, a simple but powerful security suite that small businesses could actually afford and understand. The first version was rough, but it worked. Word spread. One small business became 10, then 100. By year 3, we had our first $1 million contract. Did my family notice? Sure, but not in the way you'd expect. "Cute little business you've got there, Rach," Michael said during Thanksgiving dinner that year. "But you really should consider getting a proper education. You can't build a real company without proper credentials." Mom nodded eagerly. "It's not too late to go back to school, honey. Michael could help you apply to some good business schools." I just smiled and focused on my turkey. Let them think what they wanted. I was too busy scaling my company to argue. The next decade flew by. Chen Tech Solutions expanded globally. We developed new products, acquired smaller companies, and became a leader in small business cybersecurity. Our client list grew to include some Fortune 500 companies. Ironic, considering Michael's old taunt. Speaking of Michael, his career was also advancing. He climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious consulting firm, making partner by 35. Every family gathering became a showcase for his achievements. Michael just closed a $50 million deal. Michael's been featured in Business Weekly. Michael's giving a keynote at Harvard. My success. It was always qualified. Rachel's company is doing, well, considering. The considering part always hung in the air. Considering she's a dropout. Considering she has no formal training. Considering she's not Michael. Then came last week, Michael's promotion party. He'd been named CEO of his consulting firm's tech division, and Mom and Dad threw a lavish celebration at the Ritz-Carlton. The who's who of Silicon Valley was there, including many of my own clients and competitors. Not that my parents knew that. I arrived early, wearing a simple black dress that Mom immediately criticized. "Couldn't you have made more of an effort? This is an important night for your brother." The evening proceeded as expected. A parade of speeches praising Michael's brilliance, his credentials, his potential. Then Michael clinked his glass for the big announcement. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, flashing his perfect smile. "As many of you know, I've just been named CEO of our technology division. But that's not the only exciting news." He paused for effect, his eyes finding mine across the room. "I'm pleased to announce that we'll be expanding aggressively into the small business cybersecurity market." In fact, his smile turned predatory. "I'm hoping to acquire my sister's little company as our first move. It's time for Chen Tech Solutions to have real, qualified leadership." The room erupted in murmurs. I sat frozen as Michael continued. Let's be honest, in today's market, you need proper credentials to compete. My sister's done adequately, considering her limitations, but it's time for Chen Tech to evolve. Rachel, he turned to face me directly. As your brother, I'm offering you a graceful exit. Let the professionals take over before your lack of education ruins everything you've built. I looked at Dad, who was beaming with pride at Michael's business acumen. Mom was already gushing to her friends about how wonderful it would be to have both children at the same company. The room waited for my response. Michael's smirk said he expected me to graciously accept, to finally admit that he was right all along. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed my inadequate dress, and walked to the podium. Thank you for the interesting offer, Michael, I said quietly. I'll have my response ready first thing tomorrow morning. Then I walked out, leaving behind the whispers and stares. In my car, I pulled out my phone and began typing emails. It was going to be a long night, but by morning they'd learn exactly what a dropout could do. Little did they know, tomorrow would change everything. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at Chentech's headquarters at 6 a.m., hours before our usual start time. As I walked through the quiet offices, I touched the sleek glass walls and modern workstations. Everything I built from nothing while my family was busy doubting me. At precisely 9 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Michael strode in, followed by Dad and two men in expensive suits, presumably his company's lawyers. His triumphant smile faltered slightly when he saw me sitting calmly at the conference room table. Rachel, he said, straightening his custom-made tie. I'm glad you're here. These are our attorneys. They've prepared the acquisition paperwork. I think you'll find our offer very generous, considering my limitations. I finished for him, smiling. Please sit down. I have some documents of my own to share. They settled into the leather chairs, Michael already reaching for what he assumed were resignation papers. Instead, I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's main screen. Before we discuss your offer, there are a few things you should know about my little company. I began pulling up the first document. This is Chentech's current valuation, $100 million, as verified by 3 independent firms last month. Michael's smirk wavered. That's impossible. Our research showed. Your research, I cut him off, was based on public records that are intentionally incomplete. You see, while you were collecting degrees, I was collecting patents. Chentech holds over 200 proprietary security algorithms. The visible company you tried to acquire? That's just the tip of the iceberg. I clicked to the next slide. These are our client lists. Notice anything interesting? Dad leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. His face paled as he read the names, including Michael's own consulting firm. That's right, I continued. Your company's entire cybersecurity infrastructure runs on our systems. Has for years. In fact, I pulled up another document, that $50 million deal you're so proud of, Michael. The client chose your firm specifically because you promised them Chentech's security suite. Michael's face had turned an interesting shade of gray. But that's impossible. I would have known, would you? I asked softly. Did you ever actually look into who developed the security systems you've been selling? Or did you just assume, like always, that anything I touched couldn't possibly be important? The lawyers were frantically flipping through their papers, realizing their due diligence had missed something massive. I wasn't done yet. And here's the most interesting part, I said, displaying the final document. Remember that graceful exit you offered me? Well, I have a counter-proposal. I slid folders across the table to each of them. Chentech just acquired your consulting firm's entire tech division. The board approved it last night, unanimously. They were particularly impressed by our new quantum encryption technology, something your due diligence also missed. Michael practically ripped open the folder, his hands shaking. This is a joke. The board would never. The board that consists mainly of Chentech clients? I asked innocently. The same board that depends on our security systems to protect billions in assets. That board? Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. One of the lawyers had already pulled out his phone, presumably confirming my claims. So here's what's going to happen. I continued, my voice steady. You have 2 options, Michael. Option 1, you resign from the tech division, effective immediately. You'll receive a generous severance package and a glowing recommendation for any non-competing industry. And option 2, he whispered, his arrogance finally cracking. Option 2, I released the records of how your division has been taking credit for Chen Tech innovations for years. I'm sure Harvard Business Review would love that story. Ivy League CEO caught passing off sister's work as his own. The room fell silent. Through the glass walls, I could see employees arriving, watching the scene with curious eyes. You wouldn't, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. We're family. Family? I laughed softly. Last night you called me unqualified, inadequate, and limited. You tried to steal my company in front of everyone we know. That's not family, Michael. That's just bad business. Dad finally found his voice. Rachel, surely we can discuss this. Your brother didn't mean. He meant every word. I cut him off. Just like you meant it every time you dismissed my work as tinkering. Just like Mom meant it every time she suggested my success was just luck. I stood up, smoothing my dress. The same inadequate one from last night. The acquisition papers are legally binding. The press release goes out in an hour. Your choice, Michael. Quiet retirement or public scandal. 20 minutes later, I watched from my office window as Michael stormed out of the building, Dad hurrying after him. The lawyers stayed behind to work out the details of his resignation. That evening, Mom called, crying about how I'd destroyed Michael's career. I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I focused on the email I just received. Harvard Business School wanted me to give their commencement speech next spring. The topic? Innovation without limits, success beyond traditional paths. I accepted the invitation with a small smile, already planning what I'd say. After all, I had quite a story to tell. The next year brought changes none of them expected. Chen Tech's value tripled after we went public. Michael found a job in real estate, far from tech. Dad retired, finally understanding that credentials don't always equal competence. We still see each other at holidays, maintaining a careful distance that masks wounds that may never fully heal. Sometimes late at night, I look at old family photos and feel a twinge of sadness for what we lost. But then I remember Michael's smirk, Dad's dismissal, Mom's constant doubts, and I remember that respect is earned, not granted by degrees. These days, when I speak at tech conferences, I often catch whispers. That's Rachel Chen, the dropout goo. They never finish the sentence, but they don't have to. My success speaks for itself. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at Michael's old consulting firm's annual retreat. The topic? Recognizing innovation. Looking beyond traditional metrics. I accepted with a smile, remembering the night they thought a dropout couldn't possibly build something worthwhile. As I write this from my office overlooking Silicon Valley, I'm reminded of something my first mentor told me. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. She was right, but sometimes, just sometimes, doing both feels pretty good. The company continues to grow, pushing boundaries and breaking new ground. But more importantly, I've found peace with my path. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about soaring so high, they can't help but see their own limitations. After all, not all dropouts are created equal, and not all success stories follow the expected path. Sometimes the biggest achievements come from those who dare to write their own rules. And as for Michael's Harvard MBA, it looks great on his wall, right next to the real estate license he had to get after trying to steal the wrong little company from the wrong, unqualified sister.